My daughter yelled, "You're the problem." So I left the house in her ex's name. They were arguing about a stain on the baby's blanket. Not a big one. Something that would come out with a soak and a little baking soda. I was sitting on the stairs, trying to stay out of it, folding the rest of the laundry. The baby was in his bouncer, wide-eyed lips puckering like he could sense the tension floating above his head. My daughter was yelling. He was yelling louder. I kept my head down, paired socks, folded a towel. Then she turned, looked straight at me and said, "You're the problem. You always have been." I felt something shift behind my ribs. Not snap, just ... move, as if the place where my heart used to be had packed up quietly and left before the rest of me even noticed. I'm Elaine Marshall, 70, and that was the moment. I knew I was done being the background to someone else's storm. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. When she was born, I thought she'd saved me. That's the truth. I was 22 and scared and married to a man who loved vodka more than mornings. But when I held her, when I saw that tiny mouth and felt her fingers wrap around mine, thought, well, maybe I don't have to disappear after all. Maybe I'm still worth something. I used to hum to her while I washed bottles in the sink. She'd lie in the bassinet by the window, bathed in golden morning light. I loved her like breath, like something I had to keep going or I'd stop to. I stayed. Through her father's moods, his debts, his leaving. I got 2 jobs. I worked nights at the hotel, scrubbing other people's bedsheets, and days at the bakery where the ovens never stopped humming. I missed field trips. I missed sleep, but I didn't miss feeding her or warming the house in winter. I stitched the world together with coupons and kindness. She never knew how hard it got. That was the point. She had everything I didn't. Dance, lessons, good shoes, birthday cakes with layers and ribbons. I made sure of that. And when she got older, when she slammed her door and told me I didn't get it, I smiled and thought, good. You're strong. Be stronger than I was. Her first boyfriend was the wrong kind of quiet. It's the kind that watches too much and laughs too little. I didn't say anything at first. I thought, don't interfere. Don't make the same mistake my mother made with me. But the bruises started small, the excuses smaller. She married him anyway. I helped her pack that morning, sat beside her on the bed, folded her going-away dress. She told me to stop worrying. "He's different now, Mom," he said. "He's sorry." I kissed her forehead and prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. She lost herself inside that house for 6 years, gave birth, lost weight, lost light. Then one day she called and said, "I'm done. Can we come stay with you for a bit?" "Of course," I said. I cleared out my room, gave him the big bed. I moved to the sewing nook and slept with my knees curled like a comma. I cooked. I watched the baby when she needed sleep. I kept quiet when she scrolled her phone for hours and let dishes pile up. I thought maybe she just needed time to come back to herself, but she never really came back. She came home, but not to me. She kept in touch with him, said it was for the baby. I listened to the calls she thought I didn't hear. I saw the way she smiled when his name popped up. She told her friends I was just helping out, not that I'd given up my space. She borrowed money from me for bills, but I saw her ordering takeout 3 nights in a row. I started noticing the way she looked at me, like I was a burden in my own house, okay? Like I'd overstayed a welcome I never questioned. Then came that night with the blanket, the yelling, the way she turned, jaw tight, and snapped. "You're the problem. You always have been." She didn't even look surprised when she said it, like she'd been holding it in for years. I didn't speak. I finished folding the towel, picked up the baby's sock from the step, went to my room, or rather the room I used to call mine, and closed the door softly. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and thought about how quietly you can be. I raced. I stayed up that night, made tea, sat by the window, watched the streetlights flicker across the pavement like stars too tired to shine properly. I thought about all the ways people say thank you without meaning it. How they nod, smile, move on. How they forget what you gave when it's no longer convenient. By morning, I had a plan. I didn't scream. I didn't slam doors. I just made a call to a lawyer I'd helped years ago when his mother was sick and he couldn't afford the bakery's prices. He remembered. He was kind. He listened when I explained the title to the house, how after her divorce, I'd added her name alongside mine to make her feel safe. But I'd never taken mine off. He sent me the documents. I signed them slowly, each stroke deliberate. Then, I went to the bank, opened a new account, moved what little savings I had, canceled the shared card she used for groceries and takeout, made copies of everything. I left the original deed in her drawer, along with a note in my handwriting. Not angry, just the facts. The house is in Paul's name now, her ex-husband, the man she'd sworn she'd left behind. I'd found a loophole in the paperwork. She hadn't removed him properly. He still had a legal claim. And now I'd given him mine. I packed a bag that night. Blouses, my sewing kit, the photo of me and her when she was 8. We were holding hands by the lake. She was smiling up at me like I was the sun. I caught a bus to a town 3 hours south. Checked into a motel off the highway. The woman at the front desk had kind eyes. Asked if I needed help with my bag. I told her I was fine. I've carried heavier things. The next morning, my phone buzzed for hours. Missed calls, texts, first confusion, then anger, then desperation. She couldn't believe I'd left. Couldn't understand why I'd do that. Told me I was cruel. That I'd ruined everything. I turned off the phone. Left it in the drawer beside the Bible and that laminated map no one ever used. I spent the next weeks in that room. I walked to the grocery store. I drank tea by the window. I mended a torn pillowcase just to keep my hands busy. I watched the sunrise slow and pink behind the gas station. Eventually, I moved into a small apartment with lace curtains and a single armchair that fit just right. The landlady, Martha, reminded me of my mother, the good parts. She let me keep a garden in the shared backyard. Herbs, tomatoes, little things that grow when you water them with intention. One afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a small envelope on the mat. No return address. Inside, a note in her handwriting. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean it. Please come home. I stared at the words a long time, then folded the paper and placed it in my recipe box, next to the old gingerbread card she'd made me when she was 5. I didn't write back. Some apologies are seeds too late in the season. I live quietly now. My life is small, but mine. I go to the library on Wednesdays. I have coffee with Martha every Saturday. A little boy from the unit next door brings me wildflowers he finds by the ditch. I tell him the names of each one. The silence used to ache. Now it feels like air. I keep the deed in a folder under my bed. Not for revenge. It's just for remembrance. And sometimes, when I open the window and let the breeze stir the curtains, I think of that day on the stairs. Her face, her voice, the edge in her tone. And I whisper to no one in particular. You were right about one thing. I was the problem. Stopped letting myself be the solution. I wasn't always this tired. There was a time I could rise before. The sun, knead dough, pack a lunch, braid my daughter's hair, and still make it to the bakery before the first customer tapped the glass door with their knuckle. I used to hum old Motown songs while I rolled cinnamon into soft dough, pressing it flat with the heel of my hand. I liked being useful. I liked feeling needed. Her name is Anna, and when she was little, she loved blue rain boots. Blue marbles. A blue stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere, even after one ear frayed and the button eyes started to go loose. When I told her I'd fix it, she said, no, let it stay broken. He's mine that way. Sometimes I wonder what happened to that little girl. I don't say that to be cruel. I know people grow. I know the world wears at us like water on stone. But when I think of the way she used to reach for my hand in the parking lot, or how she'd crawl into my lap without asking just to lay her cheek against my chest, I can't help but ask myself where she went. And when after her father left, She didn't ask many questions. Just one, really? Did he love me? I remember drying my hands on a dish towel and sitting down beside her on the edge of the couch. I looked into her eyes, big and dark like mine, and I said, yes, honey, he. Did he just didn't know how to show it? And she said, okay. Then she climbed into my lap and said she wouldn't leave me like he did. She meant it. Back then, she did. I spent the next 2 decades doing everything I could to protect her from the kind of heartbreak I knew too well. I packed her lunches, with notes tucked between the napkins, made every Halloween costume by hand, stayed up through the night during the flu, wiping her forehead and whispering, I've got you. Always. When she graduated high school, I clapped so hard my hands ached. She didn't want college, not then. She said she'd figure things out. I didn't argue. I wanted her to feel in control of something. A year later, she met Paul, and I remember the way she laughed when she talked about him, like the sound came from the center of her chest. He was polite, maybe too polite, something in his eyes that watched you a second too long. But I didn't want to be the mother who meddled. I told myself, if she's happy, that's all that matters. They got married in a courthouse. She wore a pale yellow dress and carried a bunch of daisies from the farmer's market. I stood in the back row and tried to smile. I did smile. 4. Her. It didn't take long for the calls to change tone. At first she said things like, he's just tired or he's stressed from work. Then it became he didn't mean to. And then nothing. Silence. Weeks at a time. Until one day she called and her voice cracked and she said, Mom, I think I made a mistake. I said, come home. And she did. With a black garbage bag full of clothes. A duffel of baby things. And the baby himself, still small enough to tuck his feet. Beneath him like a kitten. She looked thinner. Her hair was tied in a loose knot. She looked at me the way a ship might look at shore. I made soup. I put on the kettle. I cleared a space for her in the closet. When she said it was temporary, I nodded. But time has a way of stretching when people get comfortable. Temporary turned into months, then into over a year. I never asked her for rent. I never told her I needed my room back. I just adjusted. Bought decaf instead of regular since she was nursing. Learned to like cartoons again. Wash bibs by hand. Because she said they lasted longer that way. I didn't mind. Not really. I liked the sound of a baby in the house again. Slav. His tiny hands on my cheeks. He's called me Nana. His first word after mama. But it's strange how, even in the spaces you build yourself, you can start to feel like a visitor. Little things, the music always playing in the kitchen that wasn't mine. The piles of her things in the corners. Her voice sharper, louder, when she was on the phone with friends. The way she sometimes forgot to say thank you, or worse. The way she'd sigh when I asked simple questions like, have you eaten today? I told myself she was tired. That being a single mother was heavy. That she needed more grace, not less. I didn't. Notice when she stopped talking to me about things that mattered. When she started making choices I didn't understand. When she began texting him again, Paul, I saw his name flash across her screen once. When she left her phone on the kitchen table, a message with a heart next to it. And I felt my stomach turn. Not out of jealousy. Out of dread. I didn't say anything. I should have. Instead, I held the baby, hummed the same lullabies I'd sung to her, and pretended I couldn't see her drifting further from me, even in the same house. Then came the blanket. The stain. The fight. Her voice slicing through the air like a thrown dish. You're the problem. You always have been. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she looked at me when she said them. Flat, dismissive. As if I were some tired piece of furniture that had taken up too much space for too long. I know how easy it is to say things you don't mean when you're angry. But there was no shock in her face after. No regret, just ... indifference. I didn't cry that night. I haven't cried since. Something deeper than tears settled in me. Something that felt like the truth finally arriving and taking its seat beside me, patient and heavy. I sat in the dark and thought about all the ways a woman disappears, and how sometimes, if she waits too long, even the people she loves stop noticing she's gone. I think that was the first moment I realized I needed to leave. Not out of spite, not for revenge, but because I had finally seen myself clearly, and I didn't want to be someone whose love was a burden, and I would never, ever let myself become someone else's background again. The next morning, I got up before the baby. Quietly, the light hadn't touched the kitchen yet, but I moved through it like a ghost in her own home. The kettle still creaked, the same way it always had, like an old man's bones. I watched the steam rise and disappear into the ceiling, and I let the silence settle. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. Not yet, but I knew I couldn't. Stay still. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and the small blue notebook I kept tucked in the back of the drawer. The one I'd used to write down passwords and bank information. The one Anna didn't know about. I turned to a clean page and wrote today's date at the top. That was the first thing I reclaimed. Time, my own timeline, not hers. I made a list, not of things to buy or errands to run. A list of what I still had, my name, my account, my pension, my body worn, but mine, my stories, my silence. I wrote those words slowly, like each one was a small stone I was placing back into a foundation I'd forgotten I ever built. I didn't need applause. I just needed to see that I hadn't vanished completely. After tea, I cleaned the bathroom. Not because it was dirty, it's because I needed to do something with my hands. The baby woke halfway through, his cries soft and gurgling. I picked him up, held him a little longer than usual. He put his fingers in my mouth like he always did, trusting, blameless. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry I won't be here to protect you." But I didn't. I just kissed the top of his head and whispered something I can't remember now. Something small and soft, like goodbye without the sharp edge. Anna didn't speak to me much that day. She moved around the house like I was part of the wallpaper. Didn't try to make conversation. I watched. I listened. That's what mothers do when their children drift. They go still, hoping the child will notice the silence and come back. But she didn't. That night while she was on the phone again with him, I could tell by her voice. Light and pretending not to be, I stood in the hallway with the baby monitor, turned low and stared at the coat closet. Inside, on the highest shelf, was a folder I hadn't touched in years. The deed, the mortgage papers, the name that still sat beside mine, untouched because I never thought to remove it. I'd added Anna's name the year she married Paul. She was scared. I wanted to give her a safety net. Paul never signed off when they split. That was one of the things they fought about, his refusal to finalize things. She said he was dragging it out of spite. But now, as I stood in the dark, I saw it differently. It wasn't just an oversight. It was a door that never closed. And I still had the key. The next morning, I called the lawyer. He remembered me right away, said he'd been meaning to check in. His mother had passed the year before, cancer. He thanked me again for the apple pies I used to give her on Sundays. After church, he didn't ask why I was calling. He just listened as I explained the situation calmly. Plainly, he said, legally, yes. Paul's name still being on the deed meant he had partial claim. If I wanted to sign my portion over to him, there was a process. Doable, clean, final. I thanked him. I told him I'd think about it, but I already knew. I spent the next 3 days collecting the parts of my life that still belonged to me. I updated the passwords on my bank accounts. I made copies of the documents I'd need. Wrote a short letter, not to Anna, but to myself, reminding me why I was doing this. 'Cause love isn't supposed to be a one-way disappearing act. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but didn't care. She was busy again, on the phone, ordering takeout, telling her friends how hard life was with a baby and a mother who didn't understand boundaries. I kept moving in silence. In that small private hum of preparation, only women like me know women who've stayed too long, given too much, and finally decide to slip the lock quietly before anyone realizes they're not just walking into the other room. They're Leaving one night, I found an old envelope in the back of the cabinet. Inside were the photos from Anna's 6th birthday. The one where she wore a pink crown and a dress 2 sizes too big because I'd found it on sale and figured she'd grow into it. She was smiling wide, frosting on her cheek, both hands around a balloon. I was behind her, leaning in, laughing. I kept that photo. Just that one. I folded it gently and slid it between the pages of the notebook, and that night I made my decision. I would give her what she wanted, control, space, but not in the way she expected. I called Paul the next day. He sounded surprised, then amused, then quiet. I told him I wasn't calling to make anything difficult. I just wanted to transfer my portion of the deed to him. No strings. No money. Just a name shift. Legally clean. He agreed. We met at the lawyer's office the following week. No fanfare, no small talk. I signed my name slowly, each stroke deliberate. Paul signed too. His hands trembled just a little. When we were done, the lawyer looked at me and asked, "Are you sure?" I said, "I've never been more sure." Paul looked at me like he wanted to ask why. Didn't explain. I didn't owe either of them an explanation. Any more that night, back home, I cooked dinner like usual. Stirred the sauce, folded the napkins. The house was quiet except for the soft tap of the baby's toys on the floor. I left the signed deed in Anna's drawer. No note. Just the papers. Clipped neatly, final. I packed one bag, took what I needed, left the rest. No goodbyes, and as I locked the door behind me, I realized something simple. Almost silly. The most powerful sound in the world isn't a scream, it's the click of a door closing behind you. I didn't go far, just far enough. 3 hours south. By bus. One stopover 26 minutes at a cracked plastic bench under a billboard that said, "God is still speaking." I watched ants crawl around a chip bag someone had stepped on. That felt right somehow. The mess, the silence, the small movement toward nowhere in particular. When I checked into the motel, the girl at the desk didn't look twice at me. Just asked for ID and how many nights? I said I didn't know yet. She shrugged, gave me a key with a yellow tag and pointed to the second building. Room 217. The air smelled like old oranges and detergent. The carpet was tired. The bedspread had a cigarette burn near the edge, but the light switch worked. The lock turned. The curtains closed. That was all I needed. I set the bag on the chair and stood still for a while. The room was quiet. My ears buzzed from the silence. Or maybe from the noise I'd just left behind. I didn't cry. I don't know why people always assume we cry when we leave. Sometimes the absence of sadness is scarier. Like you've gone so far past grief, you've landed in something colder, calmer. Like water too deep to freeze. I unpacked slowly. Toothbrush. A worn paperback I never finished. The blue notebook. The photo of Anna on her birthday, slipped into the middle like a pressed leaf. I placed that one face down in the drawer beside the Bible. I sat on the edge of the bed and took off my shoes. My socks had worn thin at the heels. I stared at the ceiling and listened for anything. But there was no crying baby, no footsteps, no slammed cabinet doors. Just the hum of the fridge and the occasional rustle of wind against the window pane. That night, I slept with the lamp on. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to forget where I was. The next morning, I walked to the gas station 2 blocks down and bought instant coffee and a packet of oatmeal. The cashier was a boy with a nose ring who didn't look up from his phone. That suited me just fine. I ate by the window, watching cars roll by. People on their way to somewhere. I liked that they didn't know me. I liked not having to explain. I spent those first days like that, quiet, motionless. I sat with my hands in my lap and let the quiet seep into me like warm water. I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't check messages. I didn't miss the noise. I thought about Anna. Of course I did. How could I not? But I didn't think about her with regret. I thought about how many times I'd rescued her, how many times I'd made excuses, how I'd told myself this was love when maybe it was just fear. Fear that if I stopped giving, stopped mattering. I remembered a time when she was 11. She'd come home from school with scraped knees and dirt under her nails. She'd been crying. Another girl had called her poor, said her backpack looked like trash. I held her, cleaned her wounds, made macaroni and cheese, and told her the girl was wrong, that she was bright and kind and beautiful, that no one got to tell her who she was. And now here I was, letting my own daughter tell me I was the problem, letting her words stick to me, like that dirt had stuck to her knees. But I wasn't that girl anymore, and neither was she. By the fourth day, I called Martha, friend of mine from church. She had once mentioned a small apartment she rented behind her house, mostly to students, but sometimes to women in transition, as she put it. She answered on the second ring, said she'd been thinking about me. It's funny how life does that. She told me the place was empty, said I could come look if I wanted, said she'd leave the porch light on. I took a cab that evening. The apartment was small, yes, but warm. Light fell through the kitchen window like honey. There was a square of dirt out back where herbs had once grown, and a wooden chair on the porch with chipped red paint. It reminded me of the homes we used to drive past on Sundays. It's the ones that always smelled like bread and hope. She asked me nothing, just handed me the keys and said, "Stay as long as you need." I moved in the next morning. It didn't take much. Just the bag, the notebook, the books. I left the photo in the motel drawer. Let the past stay behind, just for now. Martha brought over a pie that afternoon. Said it was peach, but the crust was what made it special. I believed her. I sat on the porch that night and ate a slice, warm from the oven, listening to crickets. No one asked where I was. No one called. I didn't expect them to. Silence has a sound all its own when it's earned. The next day, I went to the library and got a card with my new address. I checked out 2 books I wouldn't have had time to read before. One on wildflowers, one a mystery novel that promised no heartbreak. I made a cup of tea and read them both in one sitting that night. I slept with the light off. In the dark, I reached for the space beside me. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel absence. I just felt. Here, I don't know what Anna told people. Maybe that I ran. Maybe that I abandoned her. Maybe that I was senile or selfish or cruel. Let her. I'm not here to fix the story, she tells. I'm here to live the one she never asked about. The one that started the moment I stopped apologizing for being tired. The first thing I did after I unpacked was change my name on the mailbox. It's just a piece of masking tape and a ballpoint pen. Marshall, it read in neat block letters. No first name, no title. Just the name I had been born with and never stopped carrying, no matter who tried. To take it from me, it felt small and enormous. Martha said nothing when she saw it, just nodded and handed me a set of fresh dish towels, folded and tied with twine. I took them like someone receiving a diploma. My hands shook a little. There's a kind of power in small rituals. The next morning, I called the lawyer again, told him the papers had been signed, asked him to file the formal transfer with the registry office. He said he already had, efficient as ever. I thanked him. He paused, then asked if I wanted a final copy mailed to the new address. I said yes. I wanted proof. Not for anyone else, just for me. The envelope arrived 3 days later, cream-colored, heavy, my name printed cleanly across the front. Inside, confirmation. The house was no longer mine. My signature, Paul's, and the official seal. A final sentence stamped in legal ink. Ownership transferred effective immediately. I stared at that line for a long time, ran my fingers over it like a scar I hadn't realized had already healed. Then I tucked the document into my blue notebook and slid it back into the drawer under the window. I didn't need to look at it again. Knowing it was there was enough. I didn't tell anyone else, not even Martha. Not because I didn't trust her, but because some victories aren't meant. 4 announcements. Some are meant to be folded up, carried quietly in your chest, and exhaled slowly over tea. I disconnected the shared bank card the same afternoon, called the bank, answered their questions, confirmed my identity. The woman on the other end of the line asked if I wanted to send a notice to the other cardholder. No, I said. Let her find out when it stops working. I waited for the backlash, the call, the angry text. Storm. It never came. Maybe she hadn't noticed yet. Or maybe she had and decided I wasn't worth the confrontation. Either way, the silence was louder. Than anything she could have said, there was a time I would have filled that silence with worry. Checked my phone. Rehearsed apologies in my head I never intended to speak now. I filled it with other things. I bought seeds from the corner hardware store. Basil, lavender, marigold. I planted them in the small patch of soil behind the apartment. Kneeling with my knees in the dirt, hands deep in earth. It felt good to dig. To tend something that would bloom without asking too much in return. The neighbor boy, Daniel, 7 years old and endlessly curious, came by with a plastic pail and asked what I was doing. I told him I was building something small and beautiful, he said. Doesn't look beautiful yet, I smiled. That's the thing about seeds, I said. You have to believe in them before you see them. He came back every afternoon after that, asked 100 questions, brought me wildflowers he found near the ditch. We pressed a few into wax paper and taped them to the window. One evening, I showed him how to make a paper boat. We floated it in the gutter after the rain. He said, "You're like a grandma, but you don't yell." I said, "I've done enough yelling." In my life, even if most of it was inside, I started to breathe differently in that little apartment. I woke with the sun and stretched before my feet touched the floor. I made porridge with cinnamon and ate it slowly, like it was something sacred. I walked to the library twice a week, checked out books with soft covers and gentle plots. Sometimes I wrote letters I didn't send. To Anna, to myself, to the version of me that had stayed too long in the name of love. I told her it wasn't her fault. That she did the best she could, that leaving wasn't failure, it was freedom in its oldest, truest form. I kept them in a folder marked unsent. Not for anyone else, just for the record. Once I saw a post on social media from one of Anna's friends. A photo of the baby, now a toddler sitting on the floor in pajamas, I recognized. Someone commented, "Where's Nana?" She hadn't answered. I stared at the post for a long time. My fingers hovered over the screen. Then I put the phone down. She didn't. Want to explain where I'd gone? Hey, and I wasn't going to explain why. Some departures are meant to stay quiet. Some peace is earned in silence. The last piece I took back was my story. I started recording it. Not for the internet, not for an audience. It's just on an old tape recorder I found at a thrift shop downtown. It's the kind with big buttons and a voice that clicks softly when it starts. I sat at the kitchen table and spoke into it, slowly, like someone, unbraiding a long memory. I told it all, the good, the bad, the soft mornings and the screaming nights. The long waits in hospital lobbies. It's the way I used to think love meant sacrifice. The moment I realized it didn't. I didn't edit myself. I didn't try to sound wise. I just told the truth, and in that truth I found something steady. Not closure. I don't think betrayal ever fully closes, but space, air, a kind of understanding that doesn't demand forgiveness, only distance, every night. I sat by the window and watched the sky turn lavender and then darken. I thought about how many women are lost inside their own homes, how many stay too long, how many vanish without anyone asking where they went. I didn't want to be one of them, so I left. And every day since, I've stayed gone. The first voicemail came 6 days after I filed the deed transfer. I heard the phone ring in the other room. While I was washing dishes, I let it go. The machine picked up. I could hear her voice through the doorway. Not the words at first, just the sound of her. Fast, panicked. Like someone searching the house for something they'd lost but didn't. No, they needed until it was gone. I didn't play the message right away. I finished the dishes. Folded. The dish towel, sat down on the porch. Watched a bird dig around the lavender bed for worms. Something about watching a creature so small do something so deliberate. I envied the simplicity. When I went back inside, I pressed play.mom. What's going on? I went to pay the gas bill and the card was declined. Did you cancel it? Can you please call me? No anger yet, just confusion. She sounded young in that message, like the version of her that still had scuffed knees and skinned elbows. It's the one who used to knock on my bedroom door after a nightmare and whisper, "It's just me." I didn't call back. 3 more voicemails came that week. The second one was shorter. "Mom, need you to call me." This isn't funny. The third had a new edge. "I saw the deed." "What did you do? Why would you give it to him? You're trying to ruin my life?" And the fourth came late at night. "I don't know what I did. If I hurt you that bad, I'm sorry, okay? But you can't just disappear. You can't just leave me like this." I listened to all of them in order, one after the other. Then I deleted them. I don't say that with cruelty. I say it because sometimes you have to let things go, without saving them. Sometimes even voices. That Sunday, I walked past the small church on the edge of town. I didn't go in. I just stood outside and listened to the old woman at the piano trying to find her notes. A child ran by with a paper crown. He waved it at me like I was someone he knew. Maybe in a way I was. I went home and made soup, sat by the window, and let the silence settle again. I didn't check the phone the rest of the day. There was nothing new there I needed. A few days later, Martha came by with a basket of rolls, said she had extras. I knew she didn't. I knew she'd baked them because she could see something in me had stiffened a little more than usual. She sat on the porch beside me, didn't ask anything, just ate one of the rolls and said the air smelled like rain. She told me, softly, that sometimes her daughter doesn't call for months, that she used to take it personally. Now she just calls it space. I said, sometimes space is the most honest kind of love. She nodded, said maybe. Or the truest kind of grief. We didn't say much else. But her presence stayed long after she left. That evening, a new voicemail came. This one from Paul. Elaine. "I don't know what game you're playing, but Anna's losing it. She's talking about lawyers. She's saying you tricked her. I don't know what you told her or didn't, but I don't want to be in the middle of this. Call her." I didn't answer that one either. He'd already played his part. He just didn't realize the show was over. Later that night, another message from Anna, her voice cracked halfway through. "You gave me everything, and then you took it all back. How could you?" That was the first, one that made my throat tighten. I stood by the window for a long time after. Watched the neighbor's porch light flicker on. Heard someone's dog barking 2 streets over. I thought about how love, when twisted long enough, starts to sound like blame. Starts to feel like a debt. She believed I owed her something permanent. An eternal yes. That's what hurt most. Not the yelling. Not the silence that came after. But the way she looked at love as ownership. I never taught her that. At least, I thought I hadn't. But maybe in giving so much for so long, I taught her the wrong kind of generosity. One that erased the giver. That night, I recorded another tape. I didn't use her name. I didn't speak like a mother. I spoke like a woman. A woman who'd been tired for a long time and finally said so. I said, "I love you. But that doesn't mean I'll let myself disappear for you. It doesn't mean you get to turn my body into scaffolding while you rebuild a house you helped burn down." I said, "I'm not angry. I'm free. And I hope one day you'll understand the difference." I didn't label the tape, slid it into a drawer beside the others. The next day, I walked to the post office and sent my final change of address. Form. That was the last thread. No more mail to the old house. No more shared notices. No more remnants. When I came back, the neighbor boy was waiting by the steps. He had a drawing in his hands. It was me. Or his version of me, a big round face, wild curly hair, and a sunflower taller than the house behind me. I asked him what it was. He said, "It's you in your garden. You're smiling." I looked at it for a long time. I said, "Thank you." Then I pinned it to the fridge. That night, I slept without dreams. Peace didn't arrive like a drumbeat. It crept in slow, like fog over the hills or the smell of bread rising in the oven. You don't notice it all at once. It's just one day you realize your shoulders aren't clenched. Your breathing isn't shallow. The hours feel like yours again. I started keeping a small schedule taped to the fridge. Not out of necessity, but as a way of marking that these days mattered. Monday, sweep the porch. Tuesday, call about library volunteering. Wednesday, bake. Nothing dramatic. Just little signs that I was still here, still living, and I was. Most mornings, I sat on the back step with a chipped mug of tea and watched the herbs begin to take root. The basil shot up fast, eager. The lavender was slower. But I liked it best. For that reason, stubborn things make the most loyal beauty. Daniel still visited in the afternoons. He'd come clomping down the side path with his bucket and new questions. Do birds ever get tired of flying? Can worms drown in rain? If your hair turns white, does it stop growing? I told him I didn't have all the answers. Said that's okay, I think people who pretend they do are boring. I laughed. He looked proud. One day he brought his grandmother Miriam. She had silver-streaked hair in a tight bun and hands that looked like they'd held a lot of things gently over the years. She introduced herself slowly, like someone who understood not everyone wants to be known too quickly. Said she raised Daniel since he was 3. His parents had moved on, her words, not mine. We sat on the porch while Daniel picked at the marigolds. She told me about her late husband, how he used to whistle in his sleep, how she missed the sound more than anything. I told her I missed the sound of little feet in the hallway. She nodded. We didn't say much more after that. Didn't need. She started stopping by every other week, sometimes with muffins, sometimes just for a quiet sit. If we didn't talk about loss, we talked about tomatoes or books or the heat. But it was there, humming underneath, the shared knowing. It's strange how you can feel closer to someone after 10 minutes than people you've known all your life. Maybe because there's no history to trip over. No debts to pay off with affection. One afternoon, she brought me a small jade plant in a yellow ceramic pot. Said it was hard to kill, even for someone with bad luck. I told her I'd try not to. Take that personally. She smiled. Said, I think you've got more life left in you than most 20-year-olds I know. I didn't respond. But I thought about that for a long time after she left. I started reading again at night. Not just to pass time, but to feed something in me I'd forgotten how to reach. I liked novels with quiet endings, stories that didn't need a twist to matter. Just honest people trying their best. I marked my place with pressed lavender. One evening, I wrote a letter to the child I never had. Not Anna. Another daughter imagined. The kind who would have asked me how I was sleeping. Who would have brought over soup just because. Who would have laughed at my old jokes even if she'd heard them 100 times. I wrote, I would have taught you how to trust your gut. I would have made you promise never to beg for love, not even once. I would have told you that sometimes the people who raise you aren't. It's the ones who help you grow. I folded the letter and put it in the same drawer as the tapes. I didn't cry. I just sat still and let the quiet wrap around me like a blanket. That weekend, Miriam invited me to the town flea market. Said there was a man there who sold hand-carved walking sticks and that I needed one. I told her I wasn't old enough yet. She said, not for walking, for claiming space. So I went. The market buzzed with life, fabric flapping in the breeze, the smell of kettle, corn, and oil paint and baked goods. I hadn't been in a crowd in a long time. At first, it made me nervous, but then I realized no one there knew me. And that was a kind of freedom I hadn't felt in years. We wandered past tables of old books, chipped china, faded records. I found a ring brass with a tiny leaf etched into the band. It cost $3. I slipped it on and it fit like it had been waiting for me. Miriam found a shawl the color of dusk. I told her it made her look like she'd swallowed the sky. She laughed and said, maybe I did. We bought lemonade and sat on a bench under a crooked elm, watched children run between booths, watched couples bicker and kiss and carry old chairs on their backs like turtles. I didn't miss my old life. I didn't miss the house. I didn't even miss the noise. What I felt was something closer to relief, like I'd finally exhaled after years of holding my breath that night. I took off the ring before bed and placed it gently in a small dish beside my pillow. I whispered thank you to no one in particular, to the silence, to the plants, to the woman I used to be who had the sense to leave before she disappeared entirely, and maybe in a quiet way. To Anna Dot, not because I forgave her, but because I no longer needed her to say, sorry for me to feel whole again. It was late afternoon when the knock came. I'd just taken a pie out of the oven, peach, thick with cinnamon, and the window was Kay's. Like with cinnamon, and the window was open, letting in that dry, golden air that makes you forget for a moment how long you've been alone. The knock wasn't frantic, just a soft, measured sound, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping dog. I didn't move right away. My hands were still warm from the dishcloth. I stood at the sink, waiting, listening. And when it came again, a little louder, I dried my hands and walked slowly to the door, through the lace curtain. I saw her Anna Dot, standing there in a dark coat, her hair up, holding her phone in one hand like a shield. She didn't look angry. She looked lost, and smaller than I remembered. I opened the door, but only part way. She blinked when she saw me, like she wasn't sure I'd actually appear. She said, "I found your name on a package." That's how I knew. I nodded. I didn't invite her in. She stood there for a moment longer, shifting her weight like she didn't know whether to run or speak. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. Held it toward me like it might burn her fingers if she held it too long. I didn't take it, she said. It's not a letter. It's just the baby's photo from his birthday. I thought maybe you'd want it. I didn't answer. She looked down at her shoes. I'm not here to fight. I don't understand why you gave it to him. Why you do that. To me, her voice caught on that word me, like it was still a question she thought she deserved an answer to. I said quietly, I didn't do it to you. She looked up then, startled. Maybe she expected an apology, or a tear, or for me to reach out and take the picture from her hand, but I didn't move. I said, I did it for me, for the woman who paid that mortgage, who stayed up with your son while you slept, who cooked, cleaned, and kept her voice down when you needed someone to blame. I did it for her, 'cause no one else ever did. She opened her mouth, closed it again. The silence stretched between us, thin but strong. She said, I didn't know it was that bad. I said, that's the thing, Anna. You never asked. The picture slipped in her hand. She looked down at it again, then tucked it back into her coat. I'm not saying I was perfect, she whispered. I said, neither am I, but I showed up every day. Even when you didn't see me. Her eyes filled, but she blinked fast, like she didn't want to give me the satisfaction, she said. He's walking now. He says Nana when he sees your chair. I didn't respond. She looked past me, toward the kitchen. I could tell she was remembering the pies, the sun in the window, the life she once had and mistook for something guaranteed. She said, I wish you'd come home. I shook my head, soft but sure. I am home. Her lips pressed tight, a small nod. Maybe. Out of understanding, maybe out of pride? I asked, are you okay? She hesitated, then said, no. But I'm learning, I said. That's a start. She stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for something to change. But I didn't move. Eventually, she stepped back. Her voice dropped low. Do you hate me? I didn't answer right away. I said no. But I don't belong to you anymore. She nodded again. Her hands dropped to her sides, empty. She turned and walked back down the path. Not fast, not slow. Just steady. Like someone who knew they weren't getting what they came for but understood. Deep down, why they didn't deserve it. I watched until she disappeared around the hedge then. I closed the door, locked it, turned back to the kitchen. The pie was still warm. The light had shifted a little, falling across the table in stripes. I sat down and ate a slice. Alone, without sadness, there's a peace that comes when you don't go back. When you don't explain yourself again to someone who never really listened. When you let your absence speak louder than your pleading ever did. Later that night, I placed a blank page in my notebook. No date. No heading. Just space. And I wrote, she came. I stayed. That was enough. I never called her after that. There were moments I thought about it. On quiet mornings when the kettle hissed, or in the grocery store, passing the brand of cereal she used to. Love. That ache didn't vanish. It's just softened, dulled into something manageable. Like a scar you can run your finger over without flinching. But I never dialed. Some silences are earned, others are chosen. Mine was both. Life became simple. Not empty, just quieter than before. I liked it that way. I woke early, walked the block twice before breakfast. The neighbor's dog barked at the same spot on the fence each day. And I always greeted him like an old friend. I planted more things. Lettuce, rosemary, snapdragons. My hands were always under dirt, always pulling life upward. Miriam started coming by on Fridays. She brought bread or pickles or a story. Sometimes we sat on the porch without saying much, just sipping tea and watching the wind talk to the trees. She never asked for my past, and I never asked for hers. We let the silence between us mean respect, not distance. One evening, she brought a small radio, old and rusted, with a dial that clicked. We listened to jazz on low volume while the sun slipped behind the trees. She said sometimes music helps me remember who I was before I had to be everything for everyone. I said, maybe that's why I stopped listening to it. She didn't press, just turned up the volume a notch and let the saxophone say what words couldn't. Daniel still came around, less often now, but when he did, he brought drawings or feathers or small rocks he found interesting. I let him leave them by the herb pots. He told me once that the basil looked like green fire, and that made me laugh out loud, something I hadn't done in months. He said, "Do you miss your family?" I said I miss what I thought it was. He nodded, like he understood, even if he didn't. Children carry more wisdom than we give them credit for. One morning, I took out all the tapes. I spread them across the table, 12 in total. Each one dated, each one holding pieces of a voice that had once been lost in the rooms of a house I no longer claimed. I listened to them all over again, start to finish. My voice changed over time, softer, more certain, less apologetic. I cried once during the 7th tape. When I talked about the time Anna had the flu in college and I drove 4 hours to bring her soup and rub her back with eucalyptus oil, she never thanked me, but I hadn't done it for thanks. I'd done it because I didn't know how to love without overextending. Now I was learning. I packed the tapes into a box, labeled it with a single word, kept. That evening, I walked to the edge of the field behind the apartment. The sun was setting low and orange. The trees made long shadows like fingers stretched out in forgiveness. I brought a photo with me, the one from Anna's 6th birthday. The one I'd kept tucked in the blue notebook for all these months. I held it gently. She looked so small in it, so loved. I thought about all the versions of her I'd known, the bright child, the brooding teen, the weary mother, the angry daughter. I thought about the version of me she never met. The woman who chose herself, not out of selfishness, but survival. I lit a match, watched the flame eat the edge slowly, curling the corners until her face blurred and the past loosened. The wind carried the ash away without ceremony. I stood still until it was gone, back inside. I made myself a cup of tea, and opened my notebook to the last page. I wrote, I did not walk away to punish. I walked away to live. Then I closed it, slid it back into the drawer, turned off the lights, sat by the window, listening to the quiet. Outside, the lavender bloomed, steady and soft. No applause, just presence. I thought about names. How is Lee we let others define them? Mother, caretaker, burden, problem? But tonight, none of those. Names fit. Tonight, I was just me, whole, still, and finally home.